Welcome to Sleep and Bubble. Tonight's reading is from the KJV Genesis Bible for deep sleep. Here you will receive a new chapter every day. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Now, let's begin. Heavenly Father, as we listen to your word tonight, help us to walk in peace like Abram, who trusted you and chose the way of humility. Teach us to seek your will above strife, and to find rest in your promises. Amen. And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. As he journeyed, he returned again to the place where he had first built an altar unto the Lord, between Bethel and Hai. There Abram called upon the name of the Lord, remembering the promise that God had given him. Abram chose peace over conflict. This truth shines out of Genesis chapter 13 like a gentle light, showing us the spirit of a man who trusted more in God's promise than in his own ability to secure land or possessions. Abram had returned from Egypt with great wealth, with flocks and herds with silver and gold, and with his nephew Lot by his side, who also had many possessions. Both men had been blessed, and yet the very abundance of their blessings gave rise to strife. The land could not bear them dwelling together, and their herdsmen quarreled. This might have been the beginning of division, the seed of a long conflict that could have destroyed the bond between uncle and nephew, and poisoned the witness of God's chosen man in a land where the Canaanites and Perizzites were watching. But Abram, instead of letting pride or power rule him, chose a better path. He chose peace. The words he spoke to Lot are filled with gentleness. Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, nor between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we are brethren. Notice the tone. Abram does not scold, he does not accuse. He does not declare his rights as the elder and the leader. He appeals to kinship, to brotherhood, to the bond that should matter more than land or herds. In those few words, Abram shows that relationships are more valuable than possessions, and peace is worth more than prosperity. He does not cling to his own position, but opens his hand, offering Lot the choice of the land. This was not weakness, but strength. The strength of faith, the strength of a man who trusted that God's promise could not be broken, no matter what portion of the land Lot might take. If Abram had thought like many men think, he would have said, I am the elder, I have the right to choose first. God gave me the promise of this land, not you. Therefore, I will take the best, and you can take what remains. That would have seemed fair in the eyes of the world. Yet Abram thought differently. He understood that his security was not in land or in his ability to seize opportunity, but in the word of the Lord, who had called him out of his homeland and promised to bless him. He knew that no choice Lot could make would undo God's covenant. Because he believed this, he was free to act generously, free to give up his claim, free to lay aside the quarrel before it grew. This choice of peace reveals the depth of Abram's character. He had been called out by God to walk by faith, and here faith shaped his behavior toward others. Faith in God produces humility toward men. Abram's trust in the promise of God made him gentle toward his nephew. He did not need to grasp, because he believed God would give. He did not need to fight, because he believed God would secure. His heart was settled, and therefore he could be gracious. This is a picture of faith at work in relationships. It shows us that real faith is not only about believing promises for ourselves, but also about treating others with kindness, patience, and peace. When we think about the situation, we realize how easily conflict could have grown. The land was not enough for both, and their herdsmen had already begun to quarrel. If Abram had insisted on his rights, the quarrel would have deepened. Lot, perhaps feeling slighted, might have resisted. Soon, families could have been divided. Servants fighting servants, anger rising, bitterness taking root. The testimony of Abram, before the people of the land would have been tarnished. The promise God had given him to be a blessing could have been overshadowed by selfishness. Instead, by choosing peace, Abram prevented all of this. His gentle words calmed the storm before it broke. He valued peace above his own advantage, and in doing so, he reflected the very heart of God, who delights in those who pursue peace. There is a lesson here for all generations. How often do we allow quarrels to rise over possessions, over land, over wealth, over who deserves more? Families have been torn apart by such disputes. Brothers and sisters stop speaking for years because of inheritance. Friends become enemies because of money. Neighbors fight endlessly over boundaries and rights. Yet in all these situations, the words of Abram echo softly, "Let there be no strife, for we are brethren." He reminds us that unity is more valuable than property, that peace is more precious than possessions, and that to seek harmony is to walk in the way of faith. Abram's choice also teaches us that true greatness is found in humility. By letting Lot choose, Abram humbled himself. Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the well-watered plain of Jordan, lush like the garden of the Lord, like Egypt. He chose it quickly, thinking of prosperity and gain, pitching his tent toward Sodom. To human eyes, Lot had the better portion. Abram, left with the hill country, the less fertile land, might have seemed to have lost. But in truth, Abram had gained. He had gained the peace of a clear conscience. He had gained the favor of God, who immediately after Lot departed reaffirmed his promise, saying that all the land in every direction would belong to Abram and to his descendants forever. He had gained the quiet strength of knowing that he had acted nobly, humbly, faithfully. Lot chose by sight, Abram chose by faith. And faith always proves stronger in the end. It is striking that Abram's pursuit of peace did not diminish his blessing but enlarged it. When he gave up his right to choose, God gave him the whole land. When he humbled himself, God lifted him higher. This is the way of the Lord. Blessed are the peacemakers. Jesus would later say, "For they shall be called the children of God." Abram's action was a foreshadowing of this truth. By making peace, he showed himself a true son of the promise, a man who reflected the character of the God who called him. His willingness to lose, in order to keep peace, brought him into greater gain, not by the hand of Lot, but by the hand of God. Think also of the quiet strength it took for Abram to choose peace. Peace is not always the easy path. Sometimes it feels easier to argue, to demand our rights, to stand firm and refuse to yield. But Abram shows that real strength is not in holding tightly, but in letting go. His words to Lot were not spoken in fear or weakness, but in confidence. He could release the choice to Lot because he knew God held his future. That confidence made him strong enough to surrender, and that surrender made him a peacemaker. This same spirit is needed in our lives today. In our families, in our friendships, in our communities, there will always be opportunities for quarrels. Resources may be limited, misunderstandings may arise, desires may clash. In such moments, we face a choice: do we fight for our portion, or do we seek peace? Do we value possessions above relationships, or do we remember that we are brethren? The example of Abram calls us to choose peace, not because we are weak, but because we are strong in faith. Not because we do not care about justice, but because we trust God to work justice in His time. Choosing peace requires faith that God will provide, even if we seem to give up something valuable. Abram's act also speaks to the watching world. The Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land. They would have seen the strife, and they would have observed how Abram responded. By seeking peace, Abram bore witness to the God he served. He showed that his trust was not in possessions but in promises, not in land but in the Lord of the land. In the same way, when we choose peace in our disputes, others notice. They see that we are different, that we live by another standard, that we value something higher than gain. Our actions testify to the God we serve, who himself is the God of peace. In the end, Abram's choice preserved his family, honored God, and secured his future. Lot's choice, though it seemed wise, led him toward danger, toward the wicked city of Sodom, where his family would face sorrow and loss. Abram's way was the way of peace and blessing. Lot's way was the way of strife and regret. The contrast could not be clearer. So when we meditate on this moment, we see more than a simple family decision. We see a picture of faith in action, humility in power, generosity in abundance, and peace in the face of conflict. Abram's choice reminds us that the path of peace is often the path of faith, and that God blesses those who walk in it. To choose peace is to trust God more than ourselves. To choose peace is to believe that God's promise is greater than our portion. To choose peace is to value relationships above possessions and harmony above advantage. As we reflect on this truth, let us learn to speak as Abram spoke, gently, humbly, faithfully. Let there be no strife between us, for we are brethren. Let those words be written in our hearts, guiding us when quarrels threaten, calming us when pride rises, reminding us that peace is always better than conflict. And may the God of Abram give us the faith to live as he lived, trusting that when we choose peace, we do not lose, but rather gain far more than we could ever imagine. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks, herds, and tents. Both men had been greatly blessed, so much so that the land could not bear them together, for their possessions were great. Soon, strife arose between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. The Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelled in the land at that time, making peace and space even harder. Abram, being a man of faith and peace, spoke gently to Lot. "Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, nor between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we are brethren." He then offered Lot the choice of the land. Abram said, "Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and looked toward all the plain of Jordan, which was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It was like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, lush and green. Lot chose all the plain of Jordan, and journeyed east, separating himself from Abram. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, while Lot pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Even though Lot chose the land that looked pleasant to the eyes, its people were filled with great sin. After Lot had separated from him, the Lord spoke again to Abram. God said, "Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered." The Lord then told Abram, "Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee." Abram moved his tent, and came and dwelled in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and there he built another altar unto the Lord. This chapter reveals Abram's character of humility and faith. Though he had the right to choose first as the elder and leader, he gave Lot the choice. Abram trusted that God's promise was greater than any land he could claim for himself. Lot, by contrast, chose by sight, seeking the fertile valley, but unknowingly moving near wickedness and trouble. Here we see the difference between faith and sight. Abram walked by faith, not clinging to what looked most prosperous, but waiting for the promise of God. Lot walked by sight, choosing what seemed good outwardly, though it carried hidden dangers. This contrast teaches us the wisdom of trusting God's direction rather than leaning only on appearances. Abram's peace-making heart also shines. He valued harmony over gain, and he showed patience by avoiding quarrels. His example calls us to seek peace in our relationships, especially with those close to us. Instead of demanding his own way, Abram gave space, because he trusted the Lord to provide. The Lord's reaffirmation of his covenant after Lot departed shows that when we let go of what seems desirable to the eye, God often reveals greater blessings. Abram's obedience and humility opened the way for God to enlarge his promise, not only to give him land, but to multiply his descendants as countless as the dust of the earth. This imagery speaks of abundance beyond measure, a picture of the vastness of God's plans when we surrender our will to his. When Abram built another altar in Hebron, it was a sign of his continuing devotion. Wherever he went, he did not forget the Lord. His wealth and power did not distract him from worship. Instead, every step of blessing deepened his gratitude. This teaches us to keep our hearts centered on God, no matter how much we gain in life. The chapter also carries a quiet warning. Lot's choice to pitch his tent towards Sodom shows how small decisions can place us near danger. The land looked like Eden, but the people were corrupt. Often, what looks pleasing outwardly may carry hidden destruction. By contrast, Abram's faith kept him away from corruption, even if it meant taking what appeared less fruitful. The spiritual lesson is clear: peace, humility, and faith bring lasting blessing, while selfishness and short-sighted choices bring hardship. God's promises are not bound by what our eyes see, but by his eternal word. Abram's journey shows the path of the believer who trusts in God's unseen hand. In this chapter, we are reminded that the life of faith is not about clinging to the best portion for ourselves, but about trusting the God who gives us everything we need. Abram lived with open hands, ready to let Lot choose, ready to move wherever God called, and ready to build an altar to worship in every place. His life becomes a gentle picture of trustful rest in God. As you reflect upon Abram and Lot, consider where in your own life you might need to release strife, let go of control, or choose faith over appearances. God's promises remain steadfast for those who walk in his ways. Just as Abram received the land and the blessing, so too can we receive peace and assurance when we trust in God fully.